Hello. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We are talking about startup mistakes, what to avoid, and how to succeed. My name is Jerisa, and I am part of the early growth team, and I'm very excited that you decided to join us today to talk about this very, very interesting topic. This should be really interactive today, so we'll go over the points that you should avoid, but feel free to ask questions throughout this presentation. You can put it in the chat box, and I would read them accordingly. There will be time for a Q&A at the end of this webinar. For those of you who have registered, you will be able to get a replay or see this webinar on our YouTube within 48 hours after this webinar today. So feel free to just follow us on Early Growth on our YouTube page at Early Growth. So a little bit about Early Growth, if you're not familiar with our services. We've been in business for a very long time, over 10 years, and we offer outsourced financial services to early stage startups. So anyone who is looking to have expert, experienced CFOs to be part of their team, we would be that company for you. We handle all services, full financial CFO services, including taxes, monthly reporting, financial statements, APAR, 409 valuations, you name it, we handle it. Our team has several years, everyone on our team has several years of experience, and so you will be in the right hands. So just to briefly go over what we're going to discuss today, this is our agenda. We'll be hitting several topics to help you understand those common startup mistakes that can help improve your chances of success. And we definitely have two amazing people that will be presenting today, Alaa and Sirk. They are CFOs on our team. They've been with us for a very long time. And if you've been on any other webinars, you may be familiar with their voices. So I'll let them do a brief introduction. We'll start with Sirk.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Jerisa. My name is Sirk Rowe. And I am a consulting CFO with Early Growth, and I have been with the firm for 6.5 years. And as a consulting CFO, I've been working with lots of different startup companies here in the Bay Area as well as around the country. Focusing on, software. I've got a couple of hardware companies. I'm assisting a drone company. I work with a couple of nonprofits. And so I've kind of been working with lots of different types of companies, both in terms of the different industries that they're in, as well as different stages of the company. Prior to Early Growth, I served as different executive type of roles in finance organizations at tech startups here in the Bay Area.
Thank you, Sirk. And Alaa, tell us about it.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Alaa Ismail. I've been with Early Growth for a little over 10 years. And in that 10 years, I've had the opportunity to work with lots and lots of exciting companies. Because I've been with the company for so long, I've had the opportunity to see some of those companies have great successes, either IPOs or successful acquisitions, and a lot of them are continuing their growth path over those years. The primary area of concentration for me is SaaS. However, I do e-commerce, service companies, and lots of other industries, hardware, and the only thing probably I do not do is nonprofit and government sectors. Prior to Early Growth, I've had kind of a long career in the finance and accounting space, starting in public accounting. doing M&A work and finally was able to have experience in leading a company through the various stages of a startup and bring them to a very, very successful exit as well. I'm excited to cover this subject. I think the stuff that we're going to go over will be very, very useful to all entrepreneurs out there. Sirk?
Fantastic. So let's get started. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, so I think when we're really first starting out, the main thing is obviously preparation, right? I mean, you may be a founder that is that has specific ideas or industries that you're expert in, and you're kind of focusing on there. You may have you may think that there's a problem that you're trying to solve, or that there's a personal problem that you've seen that needs to be solved, and so you're kind of attacking it. And so, while we're getting started, we can think about all these great things that we're doing, right? But but the thing that we want to make sure is that we're preparing, kind of all along the progress road of the company, for next steps, right? And when we're really, really first starting out, it's things like, making sure that, we are planning for our business, right? So, what does this business look like? At some point, in the near future, you're probably going to go out and look to raise funds from the outside. And when you go to do that, you're going to want to have, a business plan in place. And the business plan obviously is going to be looking at, things like, the market opportunity. What markets are we trying to go after? How big is that market opportunity? What are the competitors like, both today as well as, what we think might be happening in the future? What kind of expertise do I and my team bring to bear on the problem that we're trying to solve? What kind of resources are we going to need, in terms of, the people that we need to hire, the financial resources that we need, partners that we're going to want to engage in. So all of these things over time, you're gonna get a better feel, and you're gonna understand your needs in more detail as you kind of grow. But even in the very, very beginning, we need to be thinking about all of these things. Right, obviously legal formation, how we actually set up the company is pretty important. Depending on the kind of company that you're trying to start up, it's going to point us into different directions, right? There's sole proprietorship type of companies. There's partnerships. There's LLCs. There's S corps. There's C corps, and so depending again on what your company is going to look like in the future, both in terms of the opportunities as well as the kind of fundraising you're going to be doing, that's going to kind of point you probably towards one or two of those type of legal formations. In terms of like equity grants, founders grants, I think that is, obviously you're going to be starting at the beginning. You're going to own 100% of the company. You and your co-founders that you have are going to own 100% of the company. And then you kind of need to be thinking about, okay, as we go through our different fundraising cycles, what's going to happen to that? What percentage of the company are we going to give up, and how much are we going to raise externally? And that will kind of come into shape. But just knowing in the beginning what kind of fundraising, external fundraising you're going to be doing you need to think that through as you're actually forming the company. Obviously things like forecasting and expenses, we need to understand kind of, how many people we're going to need over different time periods. Initially, almost all of expenses are related to people, right? If you're hiring employees, that's the biggest bulk of the expenses. And so that's kind of, one main area that you want to think through. But to the extent that you have, you're going to be needing other resources, maybe you're a hardware company. And so obviously you're going to be thinking about, the need to develop hardware, inventory, things of that nature. And you're going to want to think through those types of things. Selecting business partners, especially when you're first starting out, this is really, really key. And then I know that Alaa agrees with me on this as well. We'll touch upon some specific areas where you're going to want to partner up with people in later slides. But to just start off with, when you're really, really starting out, right, we want you to be focused on two things as a founder, right? And that is product development and customer acquisitions. Those are the things that are going to drive the valuation of the company in the future, right? And so those are the things that you need to be focused on, you as the founder / founding team. That's what you need to be focused on. The other stuff, things like accounting, things like payroll, things like legal, assistance with legal, HR, banking. All those kinds of things are things that other people can help you with. And we really, really, want you to kind of think about the best bang for the buck that you're going to be getting as you not only spend your money, but also the time that you're going to be spending on some of these things. And we want you to be focused on the right things. So selecting the correct business partners is at an early stage is going to be really, really, really important for you as you ramp up your business. To the extent that we're developing IP, then we obviously need to be making sure that we're protecting it. This is a little bit of a kind of a touchy / gray area because it can be very, very expensive depending on how you do things. We absolutely encourage you to speak with legal counsel, especially someone that is focused on IP protection to kind of put together a strategy in place to start off with as well as you grow. And then one thing that we didn't, I didn't include on the slide, but I think also bears mentioning here is, this is, especially if you're doing this for the first time, then, you're going to want to to talk with other entrepreneurs. Right. There's wherever you are, there's going to be entrepreneurial groups that you can join, mentorship programs, places where you can really go to get additional information and assistance, as you kind of think about some of these things, because I guarantee you there's going to be tons of things that you're thinking through that you don't initially think about when you're first starting, and you're going to need help as you kind of go. So we highly encourage that you try to mix up with other entrepreneurs and mentor groups.
Hey, Sirk, let me, if we could just go back to the prior slide, there's just a couple of things I'd like to add here in just some mistakes to avoid that I think Sirk brought up that are important. The equity structure and equity grants, when the company is first starting out, one of the issues I see from this, companies in the early stages, they haven't raised any money yet. There's not a lot of capital, but they need outside help, whether they're consultants. There's a tendency to be a little bit over generous or not have a firm grasp of your equity grants by going to a consultant. Hey, if you help me out with this, I'll give you X number of shares. And as the process continues in your company formation, folks tend to lose track, and next thing you know, you've granted a lot of shares out there, and then when you come to actually do a formal equity structure of the company, you realize that you've written a lot of equity checks that are very, very expensive at certain points. So having an idea very early on, while it may seem kind of too early, of the equity structure of your company, I think is really important. And I think the second point that Sirk brought up, or one of the points that Sirk brought up, is understanding where your core competency is. The Sirk and I are, we know accounting and finance very well, but we may not be the most creative entrepreneurial folks. Otherwise, we'd be starting our own companies as well. So look at where your core competency is and where you could add the most to the corporation, and select partners that have greater expertise than you may have because at the end of the day, your creativity and your expansion of the business, whether it's a go-to-market strategy or a product strategy, is really the key to success. Setting up proper financials and accounting is helpful. However, it's not the key to growing your business. So those 2 points, I just kind of wanted to add a little bit of color to what Sirk said.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Alaa. And you'll find that Alaa and I and Early Growth, being here in the Bay Area and working mostly with tech companies, so we have kind of our brains kind of wired that way. Obviously, if you're doing something that's not technical and you kind of are an expert, you might be able to do things on your own. But what we find, especially for founders, is that they may be the technical person, right? Or they may be the sales and marketing person that really understands an industry and thinks they got a great idea to address a hole in the marketplace that we can fill. And so the idea though is that you want to make sure that you've got a well-rounded founding team. So the co-founder, if you're the sales and marketing person, sales marketing / operational, you're going to probably be looking for a really, really good technical person on the product development side, that can bring to market the idea that you have as the sales and marketing person, and obviously vice versa, right? If you're the technical person and you've got some great ideas, while we all think of ourselves as being really, really good doing everything, I guarantee you that if you're really, really a strong technical person, that bringing someone with an operational or a sales and marketing perspective as a founding team member is going to benefit you, as well as make it easier for you to fundraise in the future, because VCs and angel investors, they're looking for a team, right? Not just an individual. So keep those things in mind when you think about who you want to partner up with.
So the next issue is probably an issue top of mind. As you develop your business planning strategy, inevitably you're going to come up with the biggest question, and probably the most ongoing question in a startup's mind is fundraising. How do you approach the whole fundraising process? As we all know, fundraising comes from all different folks. It could be sweat equity. There's the typical VC fundraising strategy where you're going to the sandhill players of the world here, and going through the typical VC funding that we all read and hear about. But there's also angels. Angels could come from Uncle Bill or Aunt Jane, to folks that are very, very passionate about your vision, and may have the funding to help you in the fundraising process. Not all companies, like Sirk mentioned, are the typical technology type companies that may go through the typical fundraising VC backing that we hear about. Bank financing, especially if you're in in an e-commerce type space and you have revenue being generated, bank financing might be a very great way to finance your company. Also, crowdfunding. I found that crowdfunding is great for non-technology type businesses, and we could go over several examples of that. But fundraising is the kind of the long pole in the tent that you will address very early on. One of the first issues that you'll come up with is valuation. Especially early on, it's going to be very, very difficult to figure out the value of your company. If you have an idea, you don't have a product yet, or if you're in the initial stages of product development, or if you have a very, very limited subset of customers, especially in businesses that have that are in areas that there's no clear competition, or there's no clear companies that you could point to for valuation. So valuation is going to be your biggest, one of the biggest issues that you'll confront through the fundraising process. Typically, early on in companies formation, a lot of folks get financing through either safe notes or convertible debt. And the reason why really they go through that avenue is really to address this issue of valuation. Convertible debt, it allows you to raise money for the company, but not really focus on the valuation very early on. And we've done several webinars about, convertible debt and safe notes that you could reference. And so I don't want to get into a lot of detail there, but valuation is kind of a process. As you develop your business, you'll find that valuation issue becomes more of a negotiation. There's no such thing as, this company having a value of Y at a certain phase. Valuation is going to be dependent not only on where you are in the product development phase or your company development phase, but it's also going to have, economic and timing issues. There's certain companies that will hit the market just at a sweet spot where investors are eager to invest in certain businesses. Through my history, I remember very early on, gaming was a big thing. So if you were a gaming company, people were just willing to throw money at you. And a certain big data was a really hot topic, and if you hit that market right, you were able to raise a lot of money. So valuation is very, very complex, and it's something that you're going to have to think about, but I wouldn't get hung up on it. Really, the key to driving value of the company is really driving your business forward and creating that value yourself. The next thing that you'll need to think about is the funding structure. We talked a little bit about all the different sources of funding, but one of the items that I just spoke about is very early on, convertible notes and safe notes are probably a very convenient way to get your funding without the valuation issue becoming, addressing the valuation issue. Then you need to think about your funding objectives. A lot of folks come in with really grand thoughts. I need to raise as much money as I can very early on. That may not be the best strategy. Really, I find the best strategy for funding is a tranched approach, because you never want to get into a situation where you're raising too little money and not getting the traction that you need, or raising too much money and giving away too much equity in your company. So funding objectives, understanding that vis-a-vis where you are in your corporate progress is going to be very, very key, because it'll help you define and not either overextend yourself or not give you the funds needed to get to the next step and to continue the corporate progression. The negotiating terms are very, very important to understand depending on the market that you're in, and who you're going to go to for.
Alaa, I think we just lost you.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. It just switched to mute. I apologize. I don't know where I left, but I was talking about your funding objections. Now the negotiation terms. Negotiation terms really depend on where you are in your corporate progression. Very early on, you might not really have a lot of room for negotiation, especially if you're just starting out and need all the funds you have and have a limited funding sources. So understanding your strengths and weaknesses and how to apply those negotiation terms is really key. You know, I have companies that they have a very, very important technology that is highly in demand, and investors are really, really eager to fund that technology. Their negotiating terms are very, very different to a company that is in a very crowded space, and that the investors have funded in, you know, over the past year or two. So understanding where you are there will really help you negotiate the best terms in your fundraising. And then finally, knowing who to go to, and that's really the investor management part of it. As we mentioned before, there is several sources of investors out there. It's not just the VC and the typical angel. So understanding who your investors are and which investors are best for you. Not every VC or not every angel that is willing to give you money might be the best source. Having an investor that understands your vision, that's going to be supportive, that is going to grow with your company in the different stages, that will give you the proper guidance and will be value add in your corporate growth process, is a lot more valuable than somebody that could give you an extra few dollars in an investment. The last point I will raise there, you know, I have a company that I worked with that went into a certain funding round, and they had a private equity firm come in and offer a lot of money. And they went for that, but that investor was not in the long term very supportive because they didn't understand the landscape of the business. And in the long run, after several years, they probably wished they had gone a different route and stayed with their supportive investment group instead of going for the money. So managing your investors is very important. Getting help in that area will be a key to.
Yeah, Alaa, you just cut out again.
I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm pretty much done.
Okay, and actually, thanks, Alaa. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to just chime in with as well. On the funding objectives, part of it, we and the structure. So we really focus on things like obviously Alaa made a really great point, right? There's a kind of a sweet spot between not raising enough money, and so we're always stressed out about not having enough money, or raising too much money and giving up too much equity at an early stage. And so we're really focused on milestone financing, right? So the idea is that you want to hit milestones, big milestones with each fundraising round, right? So, and as you hit those milestones, that's what really triggers an increase in valuation, so that, in your next round of financing, you'll be able to, raise more money and give up less of your company. And so kind of think about those big milestones that you're trying to hit. What resources are you going to need? Put together a financial plan with some buffer in there, that where you feel comfortable that if I raise this amount of money, it'll allow us to grow our company and hit the milestones over the next, call it 18 months, 24 months, and that's the amount that you should be trying to raise, and try to give up as little of your company to raise that amount, and then hopefully you're going to hit those milestones, and 18 to 24 months later, well, probably 12 to 18 months later is when you'll really start going out and fundraising again. But now you'll have some milestones behind you that you can point to argue for a better valuation in the next round. And then actually there was one question from Rajiv, and the question was, what's hot these days? SaaS companies, software companies will has been hot for a long time, still remains to be a very hot area. We're definitely seeing more startups in AI and robotics and machine learning. And there's a lot of money being thrown in those types of companies. Alaa, are you do you have any thoughts on other areas that are hot these days?
Yes, from the hardware side, technology really relating to autonomous driving is really popular right now. I think that's something that is really getting a lot of traction, and it's a complicated space. In the software, some of the specific areas within software, whether that's SaaS or enterprise software model, the area around analytics is still remains to be hot, especially in the enterprise space right now. It's a little bit more complicated to enter, but those are probably the two areas that I would add to the list that you gave, sir.
Yep, sounds good. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next slide. Now we're going to be talking about some financial issues. So this is obviously the area that's near to Alaa and my hearts. Obviously, we need to be focused on finance, right? So how much money we have, what kind of burn that we're experiencing, how long of a runway that does our cash last us. Obviously, this dovetails into the fundraising slide as well. But it's really, really important. You're going to be the entrepreneur / founder / part of the founding team, and understanding where you are financially is going to be really, really critical. And immediately, we want to be focused on basically just three, well, not just, but these three things are going to be really, really critical, right? Obviously, cash management. How much are we spending? How much do we have? Where is that money going? Is it going towards the best resources? Are we getting the best bang for the buck for the money that we're spending, right? And so, initially you may be just, working with sweat equity, right? You may not even be paying yourself a lot of money or maybe even no money. And you may be working with contractors who, as Alaa pointed out earlier, you may be giving them some cash, but you may be also doing some compensation in equity. But obviously managing our cash, as we kind of do our initial growth period of the company is critical. The cash burn obviously dovetails to that. The checks and balances, this is something where, I think you kind of want to start thinking about initially. It's going to be hard to implement. And basically what we mean by that is just making sure that we have a process in place that allows for checks and balances, right? That we don't just keep on going down a path where we don't ask critical questions about, where is the money going? Are we overspending in certain areas? Are we not investing in certain areas that we should be investing? Just, always be asking yourself, are we putting the resources into the best places that we can? It's great especially if you have, a team of 2 or 3 people as a founding team, where, you do have you have people checking each other, right? So that, we really, really say that at an absolute minimum, you should have, one person entering invoices into our pay system, our bill paying system, and then one person who approves it. And then, theoretically, what would be optimal is actually one person entering, one person approving, and one person actually doing the paying. And so, so that's the best way of doing it. Initially, that may not be possible, but to the extent, be thinking about implementing checks and balances earlier rather than later. And then we get this question a lot, like what time. When does it make sense for us to be, using, like accounting software, or when do we need to be moving off of Excel, or hey, as long as I kind of know what's happening with our checking account and credit card usage, isn't that going to be enough? And the answer is that at some point it's not going to be enough. It's kind of up to you to determine when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate. We obviously encourage you to start using an accounting software like QuickBooks Online or Xero as quickly as possible. You'll find, if you're not experienced, you'll find it's relatively simple, very, very cheap. These are SaaS products, so you'll be, pay on a monthly basis as you go. The cost is very, very reasonable. They allow very, very easy setup of a chart of accounts and allow you to start entering transactions and being able to, have a repository where all your financial transactions are going. And we certainly encourage you to use that earlier rather than later. You know, we get into the situation many times where we get called in kind of after the fact, and an entrepreneur may call us and say, hey guys, we're just about to get some term sheets from investors for a first round of financing. They're asking about, you know, our financial records, and, you know, so can you help us? And we go in and we realize that they haven't really been keeping good records at all. You know, they just, you know, hand us a bunch of, you know, checking account statements, you know, the proverbial, you know, shoebox of receipts. And they basically say, you know, can you help us? And, that now becomes a heavy lift, right, for us to really try to put together a history and a set of financials that an investor is going to be impressed by in short order. And so the earlier you can kind of work on some of these things and keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening with your financials is really, really critical. And we highly encourage you to do it sooner rather than later and not wait.
Yeah, I think Sirk, I don't know how many companies that I've worked with that engage with us and say, we need financials by next week because this investor needs to decide on where to invest within the next week. And the expectation is to create a financials and a whole accounting structure within a week or two. And I think that becomes, like Sirk said, a heavy lift. So keeping everything current and kind of progressively keeping track of your finances and getting some kind of an accounting structure early on will help you in the long term.
Yep.
All right. So I think that really goes into this next subject, the whole idea of infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure for startups, we're talking really, kind of the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling related to kind of what we call the back office part of your business. That's really the accounting and the finance side of it, the banking, HR, and the legal side. So we kind of started talking about the accounting infrastructure, and depending on where you are in the company, in your company formation, the accounting infrastructure does not have to sound ominous or very, very complicated. When you're first starting a company, for example, one of the things that we recommend is segregate your finances between your personal expenses and your business expenses. That's a very, very simple thing to do very early on that could make things easy for you going forward. A lot of folks, especially early on in their business formation, tend to kind of be doing the business as a side. You might have a full-time job or you're doing something else and you're not really thinking about your business as kind of as a standalone thing. So the next thing you know, you're spending thousands of dollars on your business and you're commingling that with your mortgage, your car payment, and so on. So accounting infrastructure could be as simple early on as just kind of segregating the business element of your spending from your personal. As that develops, we talk about accounting and finance infrastructure. It could be then the next simple thing of some kind of a package, whether it's QuickBooks Online or another package out there. They're very cheap. They're easy to get into, and it helps you kind of formulate your spending and keep track of certain spending. There's a lot of other tools out there from an infrastructure. If for a bill payment or bill management platform, we work with a company called Bill.com that is a really, really great tool for you to help manage your payment. So establishing that accounting and finance infrastructure is very, very important. And ultimately what that will lead to is somebody like Early Growth or a dedicated accounting and finance team to help you kind of maintain that infrastructure as you grow will be part of your growth path, and literally will not stop. As you go into bigger and better parts of your business. Banking infrastructure, very, very important, especially for startups. I find that the natural tendency for a lot of startups is to go to the bank that you've been banking with. And a lot of the big name banks might be great for your personal banking and offer ATMs and a lot of conveniences for you, but may not be the best source of banking for startups. So there's a whole host of banks out there that work with startups that will be a lot more useful to you in your growth path, especially if you're a small or a startup company. Another segment of banking is understand the bank that understands your business. If you're some kind of a retail organization or a construction company or even a SaaS company, there's certain banks that really understand your business and will be able to be supportive, because as we mentioned prior in the fundraising element, you do not necessarily have to raise money from VCs. Banks could be a very, very viable funding source for you, depending on the type of business that you have. So getting that banking infrastructure in place is very important. HR, I really don't have to talk about that. If you're growing, you're probably going to hire people. So having some kind of HR infrastructure is important. And primarily, the thing that we talk about with early stage startups is if you're going to have payroll, use a payroll service company to take care of things like your payroll taxes and all of your payments related to payroll. Government entities, states, local municipalities, and the IRS, they don't really care if you're a startup and inexperienced in certain things. They have strict deadlines. And a lot of times when you're paying payroll, it's not really your money that you're dealing with. It's really the employee's contribution to taxes. So there is a fiduciary responsibility, and the tax implications have strict penalties and interest charges, and a lot of times those are not worth you fussing over. So if you're going to have payroll, the first thing we recommend, for example, is having a payroll service do and execute your payroll. And as you grow, that HR infrastructure, grows in complexity from maybe potentially signing on with a PEO, professional employment organization, or bringing the HR function in-house as you grow. So understanding that, because payroll is going to be the biggest element or your biggest expense in your growth phase, is really important. And then finally, the legal infrastructure, getting really good legal help in different phases of your company. It's not necessarily the case that you're going to go to the biggest, largest Silicon Valley law firms to do your services. They may not be the best source for you. They might be expensive and just don't have the bandwidth to really give you the attention that you need. Or it could be that you need that global reach of a large law firm because you're multinational and you need a lot more expertise. So establishing that legal infrastructure through your growth phase is going to be really, really helpful and protect your assets and give you really, really viable consulting in your growth phase.
And thanks, Alaa. And let me just also just add a little bit on that legal infrastructure. So yeah, I'm in complete agreement with Alaa that you don't necessarily have to go with the biggest, baddest law firm that everyone's knows by heart in terms of their names. However, there are especially if you're a tech startup, right, and you're kind of forming the company. Then the legal structure of that company and the way that it's set up and and even just the equity setup is kind of important to get right initially, right? And so, this probably isn't the place where you want to go to, Uncle Bob, who has his private practice and does divorce, divorce legal services to help set up the company. And so you do want to work with a firm that is going to be helpful, that is going to be expert in those areas, at least initially. And then, I'm a big fan of, having multiple attorneys do multiple things, right? So, you may want to use like a Silicon Valley type of legal firm to help set up the company and make sure that we're covered that way. But you don't necessarily want to be paying them their high hourly rate for simple contract negotiations or simple contract reviews, for example. So you might use a smaller firm that's more focused on contracts, for work like that. So just keep that kind of stuff in mind and just make sure that you're, that you've got the right team in place. Okay, hiring mistakes. So this is a big one that we see, and unfortunately, we see it too often that this is an area that causes a lot of early stage companies, lots of time as well as money, and so this is an area that we really want you to focus on. And the main thing here is our motto of hire slowly and fire quickly, and unfortunately, most people do it the other way around, right? Most companies, they have a need. They go out and source people. They find the best that they can, the best that they talk with, after talking with 3 or 4 candidates, hire them on the spot without doing, a lot of background checks, without doing a lot of due diligence, without thinking through things like, how do they communicate? Do we think that this person is going to be a good fit with the culture of our company? Do they have the not only the right industry expertise, but other things that bring to bear that makes a good employee and a good partner for the company. And then, basically then, when they come in and they're not a great fit, then, companies hem and haw and say, oh, well, we need to give them more chance. Maybe we need to, put them on some sort of a trial period where we give them opportunities to improve their performance, and they're afraid to fire when they've made a mistake and it ends up costing them. So we really encourage you to kind of think through on the front end the right hire. Make sure, especially early on when the organization isn't too big and every single person is contributing to the culture of the company, make sure that it's going to be a good fit. Make sure that they bring the right expertise, but also, are they going to be a bad apple in the group, or are they going to motivate others, to do their best? Do they have the right work ethic? Those are things that you can really, ferret out pretty well as you go through a background check and talk with, previous employers or references. And so we really encourage you to take your time hiring, find the right people, and then if for whatever reason, even with all that, when it turns out that it's just not working out, make a decision. And we don't have the resources, we don't have the bandwidth, we don't have the money to prolong bad employees, right? Or employees who are not contributing as much as they need to be contributing. So, fire quickly. In terms of compensation, obviously that kind of, it's all across the board. There's lots of factors that go into it. There are, geographical considerations. There are obviously, the amount of experience that they have, how unique is their skill set? How big of a group of candidates do we, potentially have to go after? All of those things obviously are going to have an impact on what the compensation is like. Here we put a little bit of a small table in terms of equity ranges for non-founders. And, this is obviously, a wide-ranging guideline, for, a tech company here, maybe in the Bay Area, at early stages, that these are kind of percentages of the equity that you would grant to compensate and to incent key hires. But obviously, this just is a wide swath of paint, and depending on your situation, it's you'll kind of make a determination as to what makes sense for each of the hires that you're going to be bringing on.
All right. So the resource allocation, financing, and the so here's some of kind of like typical problems that you might face, and just kind of canned solutions. But we could talk about other solutions, other answers that we've kind of encountered in our experience. So the first issue or problem that you come up with in a startup environment is your allocation of resources. By that means you're going to have a lot of different demands on your enterprise very, very early on. And how do you allocate the proper resources to the different areas that you're going to be encountering during your growth phase? And really, the idea here is to be able to protect your IP if that's applicable, but really protect your business structure and make sure that you're setting yourself up for kind of optimal growth. So the solution may be here to kind of figure out the different stages of your company. So say in an IP situation, maybe early on, you don't have to go wholeheartedly into a patent process because your product is being developed, and that way you could, patent legal resources, as Sirk mentioned, are very, very expensive. So one of the issues I see a lot of times for companies that are developing IP, they become kind of patent frenzied, and they go out and they hire high level patent attorneys who are more than eager to engage with you at a very, very high hourly fee, and you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars in this area, and then 6 months to a year later, you have some kind of a U-turn in your IP direction that that all the work that you've just done becomes kind of either unnecessarily, or you have to kind of take a different route, and all that legal fees that you paid kind of go out the door. So being careful in certain stages and allocating your resources appropriately during your growth phase becomes really really an important success factor in a startup. Financing, you're going to need money to make sure that your company is growing. And that we talked about several areas around the financing that you need to pay attention to. One of the items I mentioned early on, when companies don't have the capital, they tend to give out equity to consultants, partners, or whatever. So managing that equity structure very early on is really, really important. And related to kind of any equity grant, having the proper consulting brand around that is important. So if you're giving out some stock to a consultant, make sure that that's documented properly. So having a proper consulting agreement that spells out the terms for that grant is going to be really, really important, because you don't want to be a more developed company and then have a consultant come much later in the game and ask for a lot more equity during a painful part of your growth. The later on in financing, I think if you're going to raise a round, whether it's you're doing a convertible note or a more formal round, um, understanding the proper equity structure and getting the proper, either whether it's legal or finance help, is really, really important, just to make sure that you're structured well, that you're not giving away too much of your company, that you are protecting yourself from any kind of claims. And I think getting the appropriate help from professionals that have been there and done that is really, really important. And then the final point here is personal attention. So very early on, you're gonna be the person, as the entrepreneur or the founder of the company, that's going to be responsible for a lot of different things in your growth. Kind of not paying attention to the details is probably the biggest startup mistake that we see. Part of it is understandable, just because it's complex. Being a founder of a company or being a startup is not, just this automatic thing that happens. It takes a lot of work, and there's a lot of attention to detail. So make sure that you're focusing on the right elements of your business and your startup strategy at the right time. And don't kind of get ahead of yourself. I know a lot of companies that are they don't even have a product yet, or don't even have any revenue, and they're already talking about their IPO strategy. Or companies that just get so focused in their product development and want to get it perfect that they miss a market window. So that attention to detail and your personal attention is going to be probably the biggest driver to your startup success.
That's great, Alaa. Jerisa, could you just go to the last slide, and we'll just leave it up there while we maybe answer a couple of questions that have come across. So these are just some final thoughts. This is a quote from Eric Ries, who's the author of The Lean Startup, a book that we abide by, and we read, and we think that there are some great advice in there. So we encourage you to read that book. But you can see the quote here, and it just means that it's just talking about how you need to be managing your company throughout all phases, including the beginning. But let's just I see a couple of questions that have come through. So while you're reading this, we can kind of maybe address a couple of questions. Sairam asked about offering employees stock in lieu of cash, especially when you're in a pinch and you don't have a lot of cash. And this is separate from the equity that they might have already received to join the company. And how do you structure it? How does it affect investors? And obviously, we need to do what we need to do, right? If there's somebody that we need to incent, compensate, and equity is a way of doing it, equity beyond what they originally received, then yeah, we absolutely can do it. It's not the optimal way of doing it. It's hard for employees, anybody really, to obviously pay bills and things of that nature with just stock options. So it's probably not going to be the first option that you want to look at. But if there are specific instances where we can compensate someone, maybe they're making a smaller salary than they should, and we need to give them more equity, then absolutely we can do that. You can do it in terms of other options. You can do it in terms of restricted stock units that you can give to employees. How it affects investors? Well, depending on the stage, there's probably not going to be a direct impact to investors. If this is kind of before the first round of equity financing, what you're going to find is that all the equity that you've given out is really coming out of the founders' pockets, right? Because the investors are going to be negotiating kind of this valuation of the company that looks at all the fully diluted stock that's available, or equity that's available out there, including all those that you've given out to not only to the founders, but to employees and other contractors and partners. And they're going to take all that into account, and that's going to be rolled into the pre-money valuation that they're going to finance against. So it's really, initially, it's going to come out of your pocket. It's going to come out of your equity stake. Later on, after different rounds of financing, obviously, any stock that you give is going to be part of the plan that's already in place. And so again, it's not necessarily going to have an impact to the fully diluted stock, but it is going to have an impact on the outstanding stock. And it's just, you just kind of, you just have to look at, what those numbers are, and just be mindful of what Alaa said in the beginning, which is that you want to be careful about giving away too much equity, especially at an early stage.
Plus, the equity is important in different phases of your company. Very early on, in a hot market like we have right now, either employees or consultants might not be as incented for an early stage company to get stock if the business environment is as hot as it is right now, and cash might be a little bit more important, especially if they are either uncomfortable or not familiar with your potential. However, companies in much later stages, stock becomes a lot more important, and it could be a better negotiating tool for you. But typically in later stages, companies probably have a little bit more cash, and this may not be an issue. So to address your question very early on, yes, stock options or stock grants are a viable alternative. Just make sure that you have the proper legal documentation around that, just because pure stock grants are different than incentive stock options, and there's different types of agreement and different types of tax implication to the recipient. So make sure that you get good advice on that prior to issuing any either stock grants or stock options.
Yeah, that's great. Couple of other things. I'm just kind of going down the list here. Alan asked about providing an email. We'll reach out to you separately, Alan, and then we can start a discussion. Estelle asked a question on patents. Mentioned that these are really expensive. If we're looking at 5 or 10 different patents, how much should we budget? This is what, and are there ways of reducing the cost at the beginning? So yes, there are different ways of filing, patent protection or IP protection, and we encourage you to contact legal counsel that is experienced in IP protection. And then Alex has said that he had a meeting with a sleeves rolled up investor, presented pitch deck, and then they asked for an investor's deck. And yeah, the investor's deck is going to be, my guess is that they are, I'm not actually familiar with that term specifically, but I think if you've already presented a pitch deck, that they are looking for more detail. And instead of looking at actually sending them something specific, especially if you don't have like a big, a full list of due diligence items ready to go, I would definitely reach out to the investors and just ask for specific things that they're looking for, and that we would be happy to provide that. Alaa, do you have any other comments on that question?
Yeah,
because I'm not sure I've heard the term investor's deck.
Yeah, that's where I went, Sirk, is an investor's deck. The only thing I came up with is something that is kind of a due diligence list.
Mm-hmm.
That usually comes when you have an investor who signed a term sheet with you. So my advice going back to that person is figuring out how serious they are, because if you have a pitch deck in place, you probably don't have the diligence items set up yet. And I counsel folks before they get into kind of a due diligence process where you want to get a lot more detail, to have some kind of commitment from the investor, because if you're going through a diligence process with every potential person out there, you're going to be spending a lot of time and effort and giving away a lot of detailed information for folks who may not be very, very serious. So the only thing I got from an investor's deck was really a due diligence list.
Yeah.
And my experience with that is really that comes once somebody who's gone through your pitch deck expressed interest, you've had some kind of preliminary discussions on valuation and perhaps gotten a term sheet, then you could get into a diligence process. And the diligence is typically just a lot more detailed request from everything from your sales, marketing, and detailed legal and finance and accounting questions. And typically that list is provided by the potential investor.
Excellent. And I know we've already gone over it. Jerisa, do you want to just go ahead and say any final words? I know we've already kept our audience for 5 minutes longer than we promised. So our apologies to everyone on that.
Sure. Thanks so much. This was very, very amazing and informative. So thank you so much for having this conversation. Like Sirk and Alaa said earlier, if you have any other questions for them, please reach out. There is an email. You can do contact@earlygrowth.com if you want to reach them specifically. If you have any other questions, if you want to talk more about our services, let us know. Again, this will be up in 48 hours if you want to check the replay on our YouTube. So please check that out. And that's all from me.
And Alex, welcome to Early Growth. Just an individual who asked, who mentioned that they've just signed up with Early Growth. So welcome.
Welcome to the family. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you both, and everyone have an amazing day.
Thank you, everyone.